It's the morning of December 10th, 1941. In the humid air off the coast of British Malaya, two of the Royal Navy's most powerful warships cut through the calm sea, Prince of Wales and Repulse, accompanied by a trio of destroyers. Their mission: intercept Japanese invasion forces along the eastern coast. But they don't know they've been spotted. High above, dozens of Japanese bombers are already closing in, guided by reconnaissance reports sent hours earlier. Aboard Prince of Wales, the radar flickers, brief contacts at long range. One of the operators leans in, double-checks the bearing, then alerts the bridge. Moments later, the alarm blares. Gun crews sprint to their stations. Ammunition is hauled up to the decks. On both ships, orders are shouted. Watertight doors slammed shut. It is not the engagement they expected. There will be no battle line, no distant thunder of enemy guns, only shadows falling from the sky, and the knowledge that they are alone, hundreds of miles from help, with no air cover. The attack is coming. By the late 1930s, Britain's global naval dominance was under strain. Years of interwar disarmament treaties, budget cuts, and commitments elsewhere had left the Royal Navy thinly spread. The Singapore Naval Base, completed in 1938, was intended as a cornerstone of imperial defense in the Far East. But it was a fortress without a fleet. As tensions with Japan escalated in 1941, British planners faced a dilemma. Most of the Royal Navy's capital ships were committed to the Atlantic and Mediterranean. The Far East lacked any meaningful surface fleet, and more critically, no carrier-based air power. Nonetheless, Prime Minister Winston Churchill believed that the dispatch of modern warships to Singapore would serve as a deterrent to Japanese moves in the region. Against the advice of several senior naval officers, Churchill ordered the battleship Prince of Wales and the battlecruiser Repulse to reinforce the area. Their deployment was more symbolic than strategic. Force Z, as the group came to be known, was not large enough to decisively alter the regional balance. But in the absence of stronger alternatives, it was hoped that even a limited show of force might keep the Japanese in check. This hope rested on assumptions that were already outdated by the opening days of the Pacific War. The idea that battleships alone could project dominance in a contested sea had eroded after experiences off Norway and Crete, where air power had shown its potential to neutralize even large surface vessels. Yet the British Admiralty still viewed a task force centered on big gun ships as a potent symbol, one that might influence both enemy planners and colonial morale alike. The man chosen to command Force Z was Admiral Sir Tom Phillips, a capable and experienced staff officer. Phillips had recently been promoted to Commander-in-Chief, Eastern Fleet, yet he had limited combat experience, particularly with carrier warfare, which was rapidly emerging as the new standard in naval strategy. He had two capital ships, Prince of Wales, a modern King George V-class battleship recently blooded in the battle against Bismarck, and Repulse, a World War I-era battlecruiser that had undergone modernization but still lacked the armor and anti-aircraft defenses of newer vessels. Phillips did not underestimate Japan's ambitions, but like many in the British establishment, he doubted the effectiveness of Japanese air power. That assumption, widely shared in Whitehall and Singapore, was based on limited intelligence and racial stereotypes. Japanese aircraft were seen as inferior copies of Western designs, and Japanese pilots were thought to lack the skill and aggression of their European counterparts. These assumptions would prove disastrously wrong. One of Phillips's key liabilities was his reliance on traditional naval thinking. He viewed battleships as the ultimate arbiters of sea power and considered air threats manageable if the ships maintained proper maneuvering and discipline. In planning his operations, he gave little weight to the vulnerability of surface ships operating without air cover. This misjudgment was compounded by misfortune. The aircraft carrier Indomitable, which was supposed to accompany the force, ran aground in the Caribbean before it could join the mission. With no other carriers available in the region, Force Z would operate alone. Further complicating the matter, coordination between the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force in the region was poor. Although airfields in Singapore and northern Malaya hosted fighter squadrons, these units were overtasked and unprepared for maritime strike defense. Communication breakdowns, poor reconnaissance coverage, and a lack of clear joint doctrine meant that Phillips could not rely on timely air support, even if he requested it. Force Z arrived in Singapore on December 2nd, just days before the outbreak of war in the Pacific. On the 8th of December, as news of Japanese landings in Siam and northern Malaya arrived, Admiral Phillips decided to sortie. His capital ships were accompanied by 4 destroyers: Electra, Express, the Australian Vampire, and Tenedos. Their goal was to intercept and disrupt Japanese amphibious landings along the east coast of Malaya. Visibility was poor, as Force Z slipped out of Singapore's harbour at 17:10 on the evening of December 8th. Low clouds rolled in from the east, and light rain fell over the straits. Admiral Phillips hoped that the unsettled weather would shield the task force from detection as they made their way into the South China Sea. The ship sailed under strict radio silence. No distress calls, no requests for air support, just the muffled churn of propellers and the routine clatter of shipboard life. The ship steamed at a cautious 18 knots, hoping to make their approach under the cover of darkness. Initially, Force Z's intended course would take it northeast, skirting east of the Anamba Islands and closing in on the Siamese coast near Singora and Patani, where Japanese troops had landed the previous day. Phillips's staff believed that a rapid and unexpected strike at the invasion beaches might throw the Japanese landing timetable into chaos. But the sea lanes they traversed were already infested with Japanese submarines, and the skies above were increasingly under enemy control. That first night at sea passed without incident. The ships maintained formation, Prince of Wales and Repulse at the center, destroyers screening ahead and on the flanks. Lookouts scanned the horizon through binoculars as the dark coastline of Malaya drifted by to port. By the morning of the 9th of December, they were approaching the Anamba Islands, steering northward. Still, no sign of the enemy. But unknown to the crews aboard Force Z, their presence had already been compromised. At 14:15 that afternoon, the Japanese submarine I-65, lying in wait in the South China Sea, spotted the British task force moving northeast. It sent a sighting report to headquarters in Saigon. Hours later, Japanese reconnaissance planes lifted off from airfields in Indochina to confirm the position and direction of the British ships. From bases around Saigon, Rear Admiral Sadaichi Matsunaga commanded the 22nd Air Flotilla, equipped with 99 long-range bombers, Type 96 Nell, and Type 1 Betty aircraft. At Admiral Yamamoto's direction, the Japanese had reinforced this flotilla specifically to counter the threat posed by Force Z. Their aircraft had the range to operate over the entire Gulf of Siam. These twin-engine bombers could carry either torpedoes or heavy bombs, and had crews trained for maritime strike operations at extended ranges. The Japanese also deployed strong surface elements. Vice Admiral Kondo's distant cover force and Vice Admiral Ozawa's covering force included battleships, heavy cruisers, and destroyers armed with Type 93 Long Lance torpedoes. These weapons outranged anything the British could field. Had Force Z stumbled into one of these surface forces, it might have faced a traditional naval engagement, though even in that scenario, the Japanese held the upper hand. That evening, Phillips received a message from Singapore. It reported new Japanese landings further down the coast, at the port of Kuantan, roughly halfway between Singapore and the original landing sites in Siam. The report was not confirmed, and its accuracy was doubtful, but it suggested that the Japanese might be attempting a broader pincer movement along the eastern seaboard. It was a gamble, and one based on faulty intelligence. As Force Z turned south, it moved deeper into the area covered by Japanese air patrols. Around the same time, a Japanese scout plane confirmed the location of the British ships and radioed coordinates back to Matsunaga's headquarters in Saigon. That night, another Japanese float plane sighted the British ships and launched a flare. It was spotted by the destroyer Electra, but no immediate contact was made. Unknown to both sides, Japanese surface forces and Force Z were within striking distance of each other, yet neither engaged. A night surface battle was avoided by chance. As the British ships steamed south through the night, They remained unaware that multiple Japanese bomber squadrons were now on standby, their air crews briefed, their targets identified. In the early hours of that morning, I-58, another Japanese submarine, sighted the task force again. It launched a torpedo attack which missed, but it confirmed to the Japanese that Force Z had reversed course and was now heading back toward Kuantan. Just before dawn, Force Z arrived off the coast of Kuantan. The sea was calm. The coastline ahead was quiet. There were no signs of enemy activity, no landing craft, no transports, no beachheads. At 7:30, the Repulse launched her Walrus seaplane for reconnaissance. Soon after, a destroyer confirmed what the aircraft had already seen. No landings had taken place at Kuantan. Phillips then made his final major course correction. With no enemy ashore, there was no target. At around 9:30, he ordered Force Z to turn southeast and begin heading away from the coast, back towards Singapore. By this time, however, the Japanese had already located the British force. A Japanese reconnaissance plane from the Gensan Air Group had picked up the ships earlier that morning. At 10:05, this aircraft spotted Tenedos, which had been detached earlier due to fuel concerns and was now trailing behind the main formation on a southward course. Moments later, Tenedos became the first target of the day. A formation of Japanese bombers from Gensan approached and dropped bombs on the destroyer. None of the bombs hit. Tenedos, though small and lightly armed, maneuvered well and escaped damage. By late morning on December 10th, Force Z was alone, without air cover, in open waters. The lookout spotted them first, black specks on the horizon, low and steady, silhouetted against the pale southeast sky. At 10:40, the Type 279 radar aboard Prince of Wales confirmed it. Aircraft, inbound fast. The alert was passed immediately, and action stations sounded. All across the fleet, men scrambled to their posts. Ammunition hoists rattled, doors slammed shut, and the battle ensigns rose. The ships were steaming southeast in open water. Prince of Wales and Repulse were roughly 1,000 yards apart on parallel courses. The Destroyer Express held station off the flagship's port bow. Electra and Vampire followed in trail behind. Tenedos, detached overnight due to low fuel and light armament, was well south, out of supporting range. At 11 a.m., the first wave appeared clearly. 8 Mitsubishi G3M Nell bombers from the Mihoro Kokotai's 1st Squadron. They approached at 3,000 meters, flying in line abreast. The British opened fire at 11:09. High-angle 5.25-inch and 4-inch guns barked from the capital ships. The gunners struggled with poor fire control due to the cloud layer and the sudden maneuver ordered seconds earlier. Admiral Phillips had commanded a turn to starboard, attempting to displace the force's formation and throw off the Japanese targeting. But it disrupted their own ranging solutions too. The flak was inaccurate. The bombers kept coming. At 11:13, one 250-kilogram bomb from the lead aircraft struck Repulse aft, crashing through the catapult deck and exploding inside the hangar. It started a fire and damaged her Walrus floatplane, but caused only minor structural harm. Crew in the engine spaces were scalded by ruptured steam pipes. The damage was contained, and the battlecruiser kept formation. Then the sky emptied for a moment. The Japanese bombers climbed and withdrew. The silence was surreal, broken only by engine hum and shouted commands. It was a feint. The real strike was already inbound. From the north came a fresh formation, Gensan Kokutai torpedo bombers. These G3Ms approached low over the sea, hugging the wavetops. They split into 2 groups and began flanking maneuvers. Prince of Wales was their target. The crews spotted them and shifted fire. 5.25-inch guns struggled to depress low enough to track them. Pom-poms and Oerlikons opened up instead, spitting tracers across the water. Shells stitched the sea. Men on the starboard side braced as the aircraft bore down in silence, torpedoes slung beneath their wings. The ships began evasive maneuvers, turning sharply to present a narrower profile. It wasn't enough. One torpedo struck Prince of Wales aft on the port side, just forward of the outer propeller shaft. The detonation tore open the shaft alley and blew a jagged hole through the underwater hull. Water surged in, steam burst from cracked valves. The port propeller ceased to function. and the shaft twisted violently inside the tunnel. A geyser of oil and seawater erupted upward as compartments flooded in seconds. The list to port was immediate, 11 degrees. Pumps kicked in, but the flow overwhelmed them. Engineers rushed to counterflood starboard compartments. That reduced the list, but compromised buoyancy. And the damaged shaft meant vibrations throughout the aft engine room. Communications with some fire control stations went dead. Lighting flickered, and internal telephone lines failed sporadically. Meanwhile, Repulse was still under attack. A second wave of Genzan torpedo bombers swooped in, this time aiming at the faster and more agile battlecruiser. Captain Tennant ordered full helm and flank speed. The ship twisted across the torpedo tracks. From the upper decks, crew saw the white wake slicing towards them, spreading in arcs. Then, miss. One after another, the torpedoes raced past the stern or broke harmlessly in the wake churn. Tennant's seamanship had saved her, for now. But then came another group, Mihoro Kokutai's 4th Squadron. These bombers attacked from the southeast in a long-range torpedo run. The pattern was tight. 8 more torpedoes launched. Again, Repulse dodged all of them. She was maneuvering like a light cruiser, not a ship of 32,000 tons. The crew cheered below deck. Gunners laughed in disbelief. Officers congratulated the helmsman. It wouldn't last. At this point, there was a lull. Smoke drifted from the hangar on Repulse. On Prince of Wales, damage control crews moved quickly, sealing off flooded compartments, rigging emergency lighting, checking magazines for damage. The list remained, but the ship was moving. Hope returned briefly. Repulse had survived 2 torpedo waves. Her crew, by now drenched in sweat and gunpowder residue, cheered below deck. At this point, Phillips decided to break radio silence. A coded signal was sent to Singapore requesting fighter cover. None had been ordered earlier. There was no time for regrets. Fresh contacts appeared, approaching fast from the east. This time, it was Kanoya Kokutai. 26 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, each with a Type 91 aerial torpedo. They descended in 3 waves, flying in from multiple angles to overwhelm the ship's AA arcs. The fleet fired everything it had. Shells exploded around the bombers, pom-poms rattled, oerlikons barked, smoke and cordite thickened the air. Officers screamed fire corrections over failing sound-powered phones. Men covered their ears against the concussion. But the bombers pressed in. 2 squadrons focused on Prince of Wales, approaching from port and starboard simultaneously. The battleship tried to evade, but with one shaft down and the rudder barely responsive, she couldn't turn fast enough. 3 torpedoes struck in quick succession. One hit just forward of B turret, near the forward magazine. The second impacted amidships. The third exploded under the steering compartment aft. The shock threw crew off their feet. The ship shook, groaned, and began to settle by the stern. Flooding accelerated. Electrical power failed again. Backup diesel generators engaged, but they could only power essential lighting. Several turrets fell silent. Intercoms were cut. The damage control board glowed red with new compartments breached. Reports of steam scaldings, shattered bones, and broken limbs came from below decks. At the same moment, the third wave turned on Repulse. She was still dodging, but the latest hit sealed her fate. 1 torpedo struck near the port engine room, another astern, near the rudder, jamming her steering. A third tore through the port side forward. Then a 4th struck starboard, punching through weakened plating. She shuddered violently. Power flickered. Pumps began to fail. Bulkheads groaned and buckled. Men ran for ladders as water roared in below. Fires broke out in multiple compartments. Paint blistered from the heat. The battlecruiser began to list and slow. Captain Tennant gave the order to abandon ship. Life rafts were launched. Men climbed down ropes or leapt into the sea. Repulse rolled and sank quickly. Stern rising, bow down. At 12:32, she disappeared beneath the waves. The destroyers Electra and Vampire raced in. They dropped floats and nets, steering through wreckage and oil slicks. Hundreds were pulled from the water. Many were burned or soaked in fuel. Others floated face down, already lost. Prince of Wales was still afloat, but dying. The starboard list increased. Power loss was now total. The remaining guns were silent. Fires burned uncontrolled. The wheelhouse was flooded. Crew tried to steer manually using engine orders from the bridge, but delays were fatal. The ship couldn't respond. Below decks, men were trapped in rising water, some pounding on bulkheads until silence took them. The last wave of Mihoro bombers dropped 4 heavy bombs. One landed square amidships, crashing through the boat deck and exploding deep in the ship. The detonation severed emergency power. Lights vanished. Fire spread toward the hangar deck. Captain Leach issued the final order to abandon ship. He remained on the bridge alongside Admiral Phillips, who had refused evacuation. Nearby officers tried to convince them to leave. They declined. Men scrambled over the rails. The list grew worse. She heeled sharply to port. Express maneuvered alongside to evacuate survivors, risking collision. As Prince of Wales sank, her hull struck Express, damaging the destroyer's stern and tearing loose railings. Still, the crew hauled men aboard, burned, choking, half-conscious. Then the battleship rolled over and slipped beneath the sea. Rescue continued for another hour. Oil spread thick across the surface. Destroyers crisscrossed the debris field, engines revving hard. They dragged men from the sea, some clinging to debris, others barely alive. Some refused to be pulled aboard until their wounded mates were recovered first. By the time the last man was saved, over 840 had died, among them Admiral Phillips and Captain Leach. On Repulse, Captain Tennant had survived, coordinating rescues from the water himself. At last, the sky cleared. At 14:20, fighter aircraft from the Royal Australian Air Force arrived. They circled the empty sea, found no enemy, and returned to base. Too late. Force Z had ceased to exist. The battle was a decisive defeat for the British. The Prince of Wales and Repulse had been sent to project strength, but instead, their loss marked a turning point, not just in the Malayan campaign, but in the nature of naval warfare itself. No surface engagement had taken place. No carrier had led the attack. Land-based aircraft alone had overwhelmed and destroyed 2 capital ships in open water. For many in the Royal Navy and beyond, it was a stark and unsettling message. The age of the battleship, long seen as the core of maritime power, was slipping away. In Singapore, the news arrived quickly. The sense of shock spread further than just the military command. The fall of Force Z unsettled Allied morale across the region. In London, it cast doubt on Britain's ability to defend its empire in the Far East. For the Japanese, the success confirmed what their planners had believed, that fast, coordinated air power could neutralize even the heaviest surface threats. It emboldened their next moves. Survivors were rescued, injuries were treated, names were recorded. The sea was quiet again, but it would not stay that way for long. With Force Z gone, there was no Allied fleet left to challenge Japan's naval movements in these waters. Control of the South China Sea and the maritime highways into the Dutch East Indies now belonged to the Imperial Japanese Navy. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.